The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is recorded by Catherine Lester and Newell Fisher and is edited and narrated by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 121, in which we will be hearing my interview with Dr. Catherine Lester, editor of the book Watership Down, Perspectives on and Beyond Animated Violence, which I reviewed last week. First though, a bit of borough keeping. Can I remind you again about our appeal to raise funds for the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund via justgiving.com, the link to which will be in the notes, or just search justgiving.com under my name, Newell Fisher. Next, I've had a very touching message on Instagram from a listener by the name of Jen, who comes from Oregon in the US. She says, quote, "I can't tell you how excited I am to have found this podcast. There are other people in the world as nerdy as me about Watership Down. I'm binge listening to the episodes and just started episode 69. My father, an English teacher in the US, gave me the book when I was quite young, maybe 10. I've read it 5 times since, listened to the audiobook once with Richard Adams as the narrator, and watched the 1978 movie maybe 1,000,000 times. I was born in 1975. I honestly can't remember if I watched the movie before reading the books. It's been such a big part of my life that I feel enmeshed in all to the extent that it's hard to recall what happened first. My father would certainly know, but we lost him to a short and horrific battle with lung cancer last year. In this time when I'm struggling to feel close to him, I found your podcast and it has helped immensely. He would have loved it." End quote. Thank you so much for those lovely moving words, Jen, and welcome to the Owsler. It's so good to hear about what this podcast could come to mean to people, and I am so sorry for your loss. And I really want to find out more about that audio version of the novel narrated by Richard Adams. So then, on to the interview. I've just finished editing the interview with Dr. Catherine Lester. The beginning of the interview may sound a bit rushed as we lost about 20 minutes due to problems with Zoom. I thought I was all set up, turns out I wasn't, and my camera would not work, which was very annoying. I'm not the world's most natural interviewer, as you will hear, and there are times, listening back, when I ploughed on with my next question, even though she had said something that really did merit a bit more exploration. However, the interview is presented almost unedited except for a couple of pauses, and will be very interesting for anyone who loves and appreciates the 1978 film, as well as film and particularly animation more generally. I've also used Catherine's recording of the Zoom call, as that meant hers was the clearer voice rather than mine, which seems appropriate. Anyway, here it is. Hi Kat, first of all, pleased to meet you at last after so long. It's taken me quite a while to read your book, to get through it. I've decided I'd do it justice. So I just want to start into a few general questions first of all. Just want to know how you first encountered the film Watership Down, and more widely the world of Watership Down. How did it come into your life?
Well, I think I'm probably in the minority perhaps of people who did not see Watership Down when I was very, very young. So I actually don't have one of those, I saw it when I was, on TV. I thought it was just going to be fluffy bunnies. But so instead, I actually saw it when I was a teenager. I didn't know much about it. I think I just remember being in sort of HMV or something, and my dad pointed at it on the shelf and said, "Oh, we've never seen that. Let's buy it and watch it." And I think I knew vaguely that it was supposed to be quite a sad film. I knew about the song Bright Eyes, and I'd been vaguely aware of the 1999 television series that had come out, but I'd never watched it. I remember seeing publicity about it, but never actually watched it myself. Yeah, so I saw it when I was a teen. We just watched it one day at home. I did find it very sad. I cried at the Bright Eyes sequence, but it didn't really make a big impression on me beyond that. And then it was not until I was at university and doing a module on children's literature that I read the novel, and I absolutely fell deeply, madly in love with the book and the world that Adams had created. And of course, I revisited the film at that time as well. Wrote an essay about the book, And later got rabbits, because what Watership Down did for me as well is that it opened my eyes, I felt, to the fact that rabbits can be really interesting and fascinating creatures, and brave and heroic and all of these wonderful things. But then I sort of still left sort of Watership Down behind a bit, and I did a PhD on children's horror, which I suppose you could call Watership Down a children's horror film, in the sense that children watch it and it's quite frightening.
Yeah.
But even then, I wasn't really thinking about Watership Down again. But definitely encountering the novel when I was studying was definitely a key part of me choosing to go into further study and to do a doctorate in this particular area of children's culture. Yeah.
So it was a film first.
It was,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I think it was the same for me. I think I saw the film first and then read the book. The book is from 1978, my copy, but yeah, I can't remember the exact sequence, but I just definitely remember seeing the film. So the book I've just reviewed, it's a collection of essays on one film, and I say it's impressive how much material has got out of one film. For those of us who are not involved in academia, could you just describe how this book came about, the process?
So
it might be quite a mundane question, really.
No, not at all. So in terms of how I got the idea for the book, I was, like I just said, I did a PhD, and my thesis was on the area of horror in children's films, and overlapping with that process was the Channel 5 broadcasts of Watership Down on Easter Sunday. And I just remember the sort of social media backlash, if you could call it that, about this idea that it was a huge mistake for Channel 5 to put on this film on Easter Sunday, and that children would be emotionally scarred by it and all this stuff. And obviously me coming to the end of doing a thesis on horror for children, I remember just being quite bemused about the whole thing. And it was strong evidence that the work I was doing was still relevant, and that, and it seemed to me that the whole thing was being sort of blown out of proportion, because first of all, there was no evidence that children were actually being harmed by it in any way. It was just another instance of this kind of "won't somebody please think of the children" panic that we've seen many times in history. And also because at that point I had pet rabbits, so I just remember people posting about the fact that it was about these horrible rabbits, like doing violent things or having horrible things done to them. And I'd be like scrolling through these tweets and looking at my own rabbits hopping around the garden, and just just kind of thinking, what is it about this film that can cause so much anxiety among people. And also I was remembering about the fact that it's also a very beautiful and moving film. And that it was a bit of a shame that there was all this attention being given to its potentially negative impacts, when there was also a lot of positive stuff we could say about it. And then a short while after that, that's when I first kind of got the seed in my head that this was a film that needed more attention. And then a bit later on, in about probably early 2018, a colleague of mine, Chris Pallant, who works at the University of Canterbury Christ University, that's the one. He is a leading scholar in animation studies, and he had launched a new series of books at Bloomsbury, who publishes academic books as well as, fiction, trade books, etc. He was launching a new series which would look at specific animated films or filmmakers from an academic perspective. So the first one they did was on Toy Story. They've done books on Snow White, and kind of landmark animated films, or films that warranted close, extended academic attention. And because I already knew Chris, I just sort of sent him an email and was like, might you ever be interested in something on Watership Down? And he said yes, and it all just kind of built from there, really. I held an event, an academic symposium in November of 2018, where I put out a call for people to present research on the film Watership Down from various perspectives. And so that happened at the University of Warwick in 2018. Chris Pallant was the keynote for that. And we also had relatives of people who had worked on the film, like the Humberstone brothers, who have authored a chapter in the collection. And then from there, I sort of took some of the presentations that people had given at that conference and invited them to then be part of a book. So the symposium was sort of the testing ground for whether doing a whole book would be viable, if there was even enough interest, because I wasn't sure if it was just me thinking, that Watership Down was worth writing about. And it turned out that a lot of people agreed with me, which was really nice.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I'm intrigued by the one about Toy Story. That had already been published.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that a question I was going to ask later on, I think it fits quite well now, was, I mean, we talk about the way Watership Down is received now and the moral panic. Now, one question I've got is, was the 1978 film of Watership Down a product of its time? If so, was the 2018 Netflix version also a product of its time? And what does that tell us about the contrast between the two times? That's a question that occurred to me last night as I was thinking about this interview. What is the difference? What has changed?
Yes, I do think that they are products of their times. To a certain extent, it does seem like attitudes toward what is sort of appropriate to be in children's media have changed a little bit. But I also at the same time find it quite difficult to make a direct comparison, because of the fact that the filmmakers never really thought of themselves as making a film for children. They just sort of, Rosen just really thought he was making an adaptation of this book that could be enjoyed by anybody, not necessarily just children. He didn't really see it as like a Disney animated film. He just was like, this is for everybody. And so it's really difficult, I think, to judge really if perceptions of children's content have changed, because it wasn't really intended to be a children's thing in the first place, so I think that complicates it. But definitely I think the fact that the 2018 version, the producers, when they were publicizing it before it came out, they were trying to be very careful about setting expectations of how much violence people could expect. And so I think that alone shows that that there is a difference in what we expect in children's media. And certainly even though Rosen and his team didn't necessarily intend Watership Down to be for children, critics at the time received it as being a children's film, and there wasn't really a lot of concern in the reviews that came out in 1978 about whether it was appropriate for children or not. They sort of just recommended it as, this is a good children's adventure film. And obviously the BBFC considered it suitable for children as well, because they gave it a U. And now we've seen that change to PG. So if we look at that alone, we can definitely see a shift.
I mean, the interesting thing in the podcast is we're about to come on to the TV series, which was also produced by Rosen, which was aimed at children, and is roughly lies halfway between the period between now and when the original film was made. And the difference is, I mean, I've really had to introduce this one carefully, because there's a lot of people have been kind of put off by it. But that was...
So is this the 99 series?
Yeah, that's the one. And I'm about to start going through that, and I've had to really think about my approach to that very carefully.
That's
a lot
interesting.
Of people love it.
Okay, I'd be interested to know more about that. Sorry, you were probably about to tell me and I interrupted.
No, I've had to prepare the ground. I mean, I've let people know for the last 2 years I intend to cover this series. If I didn't, I would have prepared the ground for the podcast maybe not being weekly anymore. But Yeah, it's I've had a lot of very mixed reactions. There are people who love that series. There are people who used to love it and now have experienced the novel and the original film. So opinions are very mixed. So I've had to think about how I'm going to emphasize. What I'm going to emphasize is the storytelling. But when you talk about it aimed at children, this was Rose, and you said in the book that it was almost an act of atonement that he kind of remade Watership Down specifically for children, almost. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah,
so
I'll be interested to know what you think about that, and about that series and how people respond to the episodes, because it's definitely, I think you can tell watching it that it was made to be specifically for quite a young audience, because I think it's a perfectly fine series, but for an adult, I can tell watching it, like, this isn't for me. It's not trying to be for me. And that's fine. I think that's actually fine, and that it's sort of a worthy thing that he was trying to do by trying to reposition Watership Down for children. Yeah, I actually am working on a separate piece of writing about the 99 and 2018 series, because because I ended up digging up quite a lot of interesting detail about the production of both of them, and how they were trying to adjust themselves to be more suitable for children. So and I just wasn't able to get that into the book. So that's something which I've recently finished writing, and I'm waiting to see if it will be accepted for publication in an academic journal.
Well, that leads on very neatly to a question I've got here, which is you've told me before by email that there's a lot more you would have liked to include in the book. Could you elaborate on that? And will there be another volume? Is what I'm basically
asking. Well, I'm not sure if there will be another volume, or at least not quite yet. I do feel like, even though I wasn't able to get everything I wanted into the book, I do feel like I've sort of said the main things I wanted to say for now. But yeah, so other than the TV series, it became clearer to me as I was close to the end of working on the book just how much of a fan community there is around Watership Down in various ways. And so that's something I felt like was a bit of a shame that I didn't sort of notice a bit sooner in order to get that in, because there is a really strong academic field that is dedicated to studying fandom and fans. And it's not really something that I myself work in, but fandom studies overlaps quite heavily with film studies. And I know people who work in fandom studies. So that's something, that I thought, oh, it's a shame I didn't sort of think about that early enough to sort of commission a chapter from somebody who's an expert in fan studies or something. So that's something that I think if somebody else wanted to sort of pick up the baton, then they could certainly look at that as well. What else? I'm trying to think if there are other things. I mean, well, there were lots of other adaptations of Watership Down as well, not just film and TV. There have been video games and role-playing games, plays for the theatre and radio plays, and there's a graphic novel coming out at the end of this year. So I definitely think that more generally, there's a lot of opportunity for more academic work on some of those adaptations, as well as the novel itself. Because of course, I'm a film studies academic. I really wanted this book to really be just about the film. It touches on other adaptations and the novel, but it's really just about the film. And I wanted that to be the focus. But I know of other academics who are working on scholarship relating to the novel. I went to a conference at the University of Glasgow last year, which was intended to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the novel's publication. And there were so many people doing amazing research on the novel. And I'm aware that the organisers of that conference are interested in publishing their own volume of essays looking at the novel as well as some of the other adaptations. So, you know, there is more stuff happening, and hopefully more work coming in the near future. So, and that's really what I want. I don't want to be the only person who's out there sort of doing and saying things about Watership Down. I really want it to be sort of other people joining in this conversation and drawing more attention to this amazing, beautiful world.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, we've talked about the radio plays. We've on the podcast, we've covered the 1984 Australian play, and I play radio play, and I plan to cover the 2002 and 2016 radio plays on Radio 4. Basic idea is to go through it in chronological order, but I mean, you've just given me some ideas for some further reading there. So I'm always on the lookout for another episode on a work on Watership Down. In the book itself, like I say, I haven't read an academic book in a long time, far too long. So I may not have picked up on some of the subtleties of the book. I do. One of the chapters, a Lapine Corpus, chapter 3. Fascinating ideas in that, and the idea of English as translated Lapine. Why was it in part 1? Was it to do with script development?
Well, the structure of the book did change a few times during its development, and I think if I recall correctly, that chapter it may have been situated in the part 2 on animals,
right,
or something, and at another time I had it in its own section with chapter 4, animating utopia, and that section was called adaptation, I think, because they were both sort of touching upon issues of, you know, translation from the page to screen. I then got kind of challenged on that by a peer reviewer. So before the novel was printed, it was anonymously reviewed for quality, and they were like, it seems a bit weird that this section is called adaptation, because they're not really dealing with adaptation theory. They're just sort of very tangentially related to adaptation. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So I had to do some reworking, and it was partly about balance. I didn't really want any section of the book to be really, really long and another section to be quite short. But I also felt that chapter acted as sort of a nice bridge between part 1, which is called, bringing the Warren to life, where the focus was production, so the production narratives of the film, but also that chapter, A Lapine Corpus, isn't really looking at the making of the film in the way that the other chapters are in that section, but it is looking at certain decisions that the filmmakers had to make in order to bring the language of the rabbits to the medium of film.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm very glad it's in the book, because it's a fascinating concept in the chapter.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And then obviously because of its focus on animals, it sort of, I hope, acts as a bit of a segue into part 2, which I think is just called Animal Stories. So I feel like it really could have been in either of those parts. And a big part of the reason it ended up in part 1 was simply for balance.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but it was really difficult, really, to structure the book and trying to figure out what went where, because a lot of the chapters could have ended up in multiple sections. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the sections did make sense, and the way it was themed, and there seemed to be a progression of the chapters as well. Like I say, my bias was part 4 about the ethics, basically the ethics of the film, very much. Now, chapter 4, animating utopia. It questions, again, and one of my favourite chapters, it questions whether it's possible to create a story such as Watership Down without it being an allegory. Adams has always said it's not an allegory. Now, I don't believe him, basically, but who in current theory is the final arbiter of this?
Gosh, I feel like there's still, the debate goes on about that question, about, you know, who was it, Roland Barthes, who proposed the idea of the death of the author, but academics are still sort of arguing about questions of authorship and the idea of the auteur. For me, I think the beauty of interpretation is that there is no final arbiter. It's all up to the reader or the viewer to interpret how they want based on the evidence that's in the book. And if people interpret it as an allegory, and especially if it's an allegory that they find helpful to understand the world around them, then I think that's great. So, people have read it as like a Holocaust allegory or a war allegory, and there have been interpretations of the different Warrens as representing different sort of political ideologies. So I think, if that helps people to sort of understand real world issues, I think that's wonderful. If people also want to read it as just being a story about rabbits, I think that is also fine.
It almost, what I loved about the chapter was it went into a kind of Marxist analysis. I did a tongue-in-cheek Marxist analysis of The Warren of the Snares in one episode, but it actually went into an actual talk about Donald Duck and things like this, where you strip away the comedy, what morals are being taught here. It was fascinating to me. Another thing about this is really something I go into with the TV series, that Maureen Furness's continuum of animation styles in chapter 11 is a fascinating idea, because that really do you think that concept might be the hook that will bring animation more into the mainstream of film studies? Because it's said not to be in chapter 12. For me, that really gives a way in to actually analysing cartoons and the way, not cartoons, animation, and the way we respond to them. I'm going to refer to that continuum a lot when I'm looking at the TV series. Do you think that might be a major way in for film studies?
I think that would be nice. Although the thing is that Furness's book, where she talked about that continuum of animated styles, was published in the early 2000s, I think. So I sort of feel like if it was going to have a wider impact on film studies, it probably should have happened already. That doesn't necessarily mean it won't. But I think that that's a really great question, and it's representative of the way that animation is often still sort of marginalized a fair bit in academic film and television studies. Because it's still often seen by a lot of people as, just for children and therefore not worthy of attention. And obviously I work on children's media, so I would challenge just that perception alone. And I know, there is still a bit of a bias, but Furness's work has been very influential, at least within the field of animation studies. And I use her continuum to teach animation to my first year students. And I think it's really useful, because that idea of, the beauty of animation is it can be so fluid in how it looks. I mean, I've just seen Across the Spider-Verse for the third time at the cinema, because it's just such a wonderful feast for the eyes, and such a wonderful example of the idea of this continuum. And the students find it really useful, I think. So it does make an impact, but yes, it could be adopted more widely by people outside of just animation studies, and people could do to probably pay a bit more respect to animation generally.
Absolutely. Well, that leads into the next question I was going to ask, because as time goes on with CGI, live action films, which are presented as the real world, are increasingly becoming animations. We're going to end up, I think, I'm just not even going to say this as a question, it seems to be, we're going to end up with a lot of action films not lying at the completely realistic end of that continuum, that the line between the two seems to be being blurred. Is that something that's being studied at all?
I think so. It's not kind of my direct sort of area of study, but I would think so. And certainly the study of special effects falls within the field of animation studies. Lots of great people who work on studying special effects draw from concepts in animation. And so actually, going back to your previous question, maybe actually we are seeing a broader acceptance of animation studies purely because so many mainstream films have animation in them. And a lot of the time it's invisible. We don't even realize that special effects are being used a lot of the time now. And I also wonder if the advancements in AI technology will also increase to quite a large extent the amount of CG animation that's used in films, as well as how people study those films. Yeah.
I mean, the classic example of this, I think, is the superhero landing with your leg stretched out to the side that would actually land people in hospital, but it's being reality. But actually, that's not something that can happen in the real physical world. So already we're drawing away from real physics. That's an example I can think of. Right. Final question I've got. I mean, chapter 13, your own chapter. It was one of the most interesting for me, but it seemed to me it returned to some of the things in the introduction. It seemed to set out the underlying motivation of the whole book. Have I got that right?
Yes, I think basically, yes, I think you have. Because of course that chapter 13 is the chapter that I wrote, and I wrote it alongside the introduction. So my thoughts were sort of, there was a blurred line between those two pieces as I was working on them. And yes, pretty much as I explained before, the first seed of doing an academic study of Watership Down was sort of planted in my head after those Channel 5 broadcasts.
Yeah.
And so, and that's also where I sort of address those broadcasts within that chapter, where I'm thinking about those moral panics and what that reveals about the way that we view children and the way that we view rabbits in particular. So yes, I mean, I'm not sure if I was really conscious when I was writing it that was setting out the underlying motivation, but I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. It's really representative of the fact that I was like, we need to pay more detailed and nuanced attention to the ways in which Watership Down is violent and horrific, but also, so that was my chapter, is doing that, but also we need to look beyond that, and that's why the title of the book is Perspectives on and Beyond Animated Violence, because I really wanted it to be clear. We're going to look at the violence in a more detailed way than anyone has, and we're also going to pay attention to all of those other things that get overlooked because of that obsession with Watership Down as a scary children's film. Yeah,
I mean, that's a lot of reactions I've had initially when they look at the title. I think, people need to look at that word beyond. It's not just about the violence. The initial people are fans of the film don't like it being looked upon as a lot of them as just a violent film, because there's so much more to it. Particularly the one response I've had that I'm reading out this week is from someone, I think I might have read it out, I'm not sure when I'm reading this out, but it was someone who said that for them it was the ending that particularly hit home with them when they saw it at a young age, the death of Hazel, the most unviolent death in the whole thing. It's very good how you close with that chapter, Mourning Hazel Ra. I think that's really good closing to the book. I think that was the perfect way to close it. And I hadn't really taken on board before that Bright Eyes is not used in that sequence. Of course, it's not. You can't hear it, but it's quite strange in a way it's not used. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Sorry about the technical glitches earlier.
That's fine. I was really glad to talk to you about it, and thank you again for your very generous and what's the word? Your review. It was you paid a lot of attention, and you were critical but in a constructive way, and I really appreciated the fact that you dedicated so much time to doing that.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was my pleasure.
Yeah.
So there we are. A lot to be thinking about, and I must say some interesting leads for future one-off episodes. Thank you so much to Dr. Catherine Lester for her time, which has made for a very interesting interview, and of course for the book she edited. Details of how to get hold of a copy will be in the notes. Next time, an introduction to the 1999 TV series of Watership Down.